Welcome back to Practice Underwater. Last week I said we would have a follow-up with a guest, and I forgot that this is literally the next episode is another follow-up. So this is, honestly, this is probably one of our most high-performing guests we've ever had on air before, right, Matt?
Yeah, definitely. Especially in the startup space, like totally crushing it.
Yeah, I mean, she was all kinds of impressive her first time. And, you know, I think for me that I've never been more blown away at somebody's diagnosis numbers than hers. And bringing her back on for this is Sarah, by the way, if you remember her from the startup. This is the dentist that took off like 3 months before she started to just fully promote her practice and just killed it. And Matt and I have gotten to know Sarah really well. Obviously, that's not her real name, but she works with us closely, and we've both. I mean, Matt and I have both grown a lot because of her. It has very much been a two-way street for us, and she's an incredibly impressive person. And I think one of the things that she's one of those people that the more I interact with her, the more impressed I am. I don't know if that's been your experience, Matt, but that's definitely been mine.
Yeah, I mean, she's absolutely dynamite. Like it's funny, her skills of the practice are very similar to mine. Her strengths are my strengths, her weaknesses are my weaknesses, but she offers such different perspectives with all the marketing, all the Invisalign. Like she adds a ton, even though we share similar strengths, that my practice has grown because of her. I mean, it just has.
Yes, my practice has grown. Well, my associate's production has grown because of her, which is so weird. That's like 3 levels removed.
A little different.
But it totally has. And, we'll just get right into the interview. This is somebody who has a very successful practice and wants something more and different. And it's starting to become a much more favorite topic for me.
Well, I'm really excited for today's episode. Today on Practice Underwater, I have with me here today a repeat guest on the show. So Dr. Sarah is here today, and we normally have this wonderful tradition on the show where we have the doctor actually say their name, their fake name, but this time it was said last time. So Sarah, it's a pleasure having you back. I'm really excited for this follow-up episode today.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And actually, this might be a shared practices first because Matt interviewed me last time, and then it's you this time. So I don't know if that's happened before.
Yeah, so I think we should go through the story of why you're back. So Sarah and I were talking the other day, and sometimes I'm in the middle of a conversation, and this literally happened to me like an hour ago, where I said, "Stop! Will you come on Practice Underwater?" And because sometimes I give, Sarah's not a coaching client of mine, but we were kind of having a coaching like conversation, and I was like, you know what, this would be really good to do on air. And so us podcasters have this really bad habit of interrupting conversation in the middle of conversation to reschedule it for a time where we can press record. And so here we are. Sarah, for those of us in our audience who haven't heard your first part, can you take us through sort of, I guess, both where you were at in your practice, what you guys talked about, and some of your takeaways, and I guess an update since then?
Yeah. So I started so I've been an associate for about 2.5 years, and we were looking to do a startup. My husband and I. He's not a dentist, but is definitely a big reason and a big support through this process. So we started in December of 2018. And I'd like to think that we did our research, and looks like we did a lot of things right. As part of my skill set as a general dentist, I kind of do it all. Just all basic general dentistry, extractions, implants, deep diving into Invisalign. So that really helped sort of start my practice up, and we sort of hit the ground running. I think our first full year we did about 1.2. George, I don't know if I should give out numbers, but
no, this you're anonymous. So we're supposed to have a dashboard. I don't have a dashboard because we had one last time and there was a mix up there. So I'm gonna rely on Sarah for all of our data. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, I'll try to be as accurate as possible.
So first 12 months, you did about 1.2?
Yeah.
Wow. In collections or production?
So production and collections were like 953-ish.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good for you. So that's adjusted production or gross?
So 1.2 was gross. So, or I guess we collect 90% of our adjusted production. So we're still kind of getting better on that just because I didn't have someone
Okay.
to sort
And
of
then
do it. Go ahead.
with growth, there's always the collections lag. So,
Yeah.
you know, my guess is that month 1 wasn't the same as month 12.
Yeah.
And so that difference right there between them is also the reason why 950 isn't more like 1.1
Yeah.
or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, you know, I think for a young practice to do 1.2, let's call it adjusted production in your first year, nice.
Yeah.
Killing it.
Yeah.
And that was what Matt and I remarked at on the first episode was, you know, I think we looked at you and you were one of 3 female dentists that we've had on the show now that we look at. I don't know what is up with you guys, but the female dentists we get on the show diagnostically are far and away killing it. And I think that was the one impression I had from looking at. And so you opened up, like you started marketing 3 months before your startup, right?
Yeah. So that was a big segment of I guess like our first my first appearance. But yeah, I did background marketing, lots of Facebook, like social media marketing, and just sort of had our presence known. I visited, several businesses, and I gave out, dental goodie bags, dressed them up and stuff. So I think that definitely helped sort of start a buzz about my practice. People in the town already knew, where it was coming. So that helped quite a bit. And, I see kids, I see adults, I kind of see everyone in between. So that helped too. I feel like a lot of my early patients were young kids, and then their parents started coming. And we just grew from there. And then
How old is your practice now?
it's a year and 6 months. So we started December 2018. So
Nice.
yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, and then I think like towards the end we really found, I guess last year we started doing really well, consistently, really well for us, consistently, 120 plus in collections, and about 140, 150. A couple months we hit 170 in adjusted production. A little bit of a lag is because we started taking on some Invisalign patients, and started doing in office financing. So that's where we're at, and I'm quickly finding that I am the bottleneck in my practice. Patients can't like come in quickly enough to see me, or even if it's my hygienist, I can't get the. So there's just a bottleneck in terms of how much demand we have. The way I run my schedule is I try to leave some gaps there for same day treatment, and sort of same day Invisalign starts, or like I'll do a quick extraction bone graft. So I try to leave some room for same day dentistry, and I think that kind of always adds a little bit more to our daily numbers.
Yeah, I think when we were talking, you said 30% of your production comes same day.
Yeah. Maybe
That's
even
incredible.
50. Yeah, maybe even 50% sometimes, because I have dental intel, and sometimes what we're projected for the month will sort of double it. So if we're projected like 80, 90, we're usually at 150 plus. So
Nice. And yeah, I'm a very big non-dental intel fan. So I'm not even going to bother trying to figure out what's going on in that software. So any questions I have, we're going to rely on Sarah to look that up in Dental Intel or whatever's going on that website to get us the answer we need. So yeah, I think that's so my questions were you and Matt's interview. So that was about 6 months ago right now, right?
Yeah, so we interviewed in January. So I think he had maybe my December December numbers, October.
Fun fact, we recorded that intro outro in person. That was one of the only ones we've ever recorded in person. So Matt and I were in my living room,
cool.
and we were recording with our podcast producer, John. So that was the fun fact. But anyway, so what were your takeaways from the interview with Matt? What kind of stuff did you guys talk about that you remember?
So definitely, I think at that point, I was trying to start focus. I was at least trying to focus a little bit more on AR, clean up that. And then we also spoke about, like you've mentioned before, the 3 female dentists that have been on the show have gone through some staff turnover, team turnover. So, and then, I kind of came to that self-realization as well. So I've been trying really hard to sort of set up systems and just prevent that, but also get our team to um, a spot where I don't have to work through or push through that turnover. Having said that, this is post COVID, and the events of a couple weeks for me I feel like I'm already now mentally going through replacing a couple people on my team. So that's another takeaway. And I think I remember asking Matt for critique, and he didn't give me much. So uh, I guess like the only thing would be my leadership style, which I'm trying to improve. Uh, but I don't know if there was, and I think you had some in your outro. I think you had some great points on diagnosis and what I can do to sort of continue it. But I'm sorry if I don't have much critique that I
Sure.
remember from that show. But I just learned so much from shared practices anyway. So
Cool. Well, I think you know, you kind of came on the first time with a very different request than you're coming on this time with. So for those of you, let me fill you in on so we had a conversation on the phone about how you were looking at potentially either, expanding your practice to be more of a group practice feel, or buying a second practice or something like that. And that's where we wanted to have this conversation on air. The first time you were coming on as a solo, and as a solo, you're killing it. And I think a lot of solo coaching is a lot of staff management, leadership, diagnosis, case acceptance. Notice the tone of my voice as I'm talking about all these things. It's my favorite topics. And so, it is, and that's where, Matt does really well. And, you guys, your conversations were centered on our look at those parts of your practice. And AR was, I think, the one thing that we had noticed, and you've kind of talked about as well. But you coming on today, I kind of want you to, I guess, fill our audience in on where you're at in your life. What are you thinking about moving forward? But first, I want to applaud you on, startups are cool because everyone's loan for a startup is about the same. It's about 500K, give or take 100K. And what you do with that loan and what your net worth is after that loan is all up to you. And it's all you have is a practice with no patients. And you are worth a lot more now than you were 18 months ago. And so I think it's cool to acknowledge you for that as well, because I mean, yeah, if you collect 1.5 this year, for example, I mean, let's just take COVID out of it. Let's just say you collect 1.5, 1.6, you're worth, it's $1 million net gain on your original investment. So don't forget that. Like,
yeah,
that's a cool feeling.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting to sort of we only have just year over year, we only have like a year's worth of history or data or numbers, but it's always exciting to be like, oh wow, did I just only do this much last February, and then this February already we're off to the races. So it's exciting to see that growth. I hope that we're able to sustain it and continue growing. And actually, I think that was the end of our first of my episode with Matt. I was like, I want to see between 30 to 50% growth this year, and we hope to push through and maybe end the next 6 months on a high note.
Cool. So now, what's inspired the shift towards? I don't know. Was it a shift? Did you open up your practice with solo in mind forever, or did you open it up with this is one of multiple, and maybe I have an associate? Like, what was in your mindset when you opened up?
So a little bit of background. My husband's family has always been in sort of small and large businesses. They have a couple of hotels and a couple of smaller businesses, and he has always said, which I find so true, is like he's like the operations just really sucks out all the joy that you could have just by getting stuck in the weeds. So I think at the back of our minds, and we didn't know how our startup was going to do. I mean, we knew that it was going to be fine. We just didn't know how fine. So, so I think the challenge is then, as you said, HR and creating systems and employee related stuff and all of that just essentially just drains so much energy. And I do like dentistry, but I feel like I like it only for about 3 or 4 days, and then it's the other stuff that gets to be. So I think the intent always was like, let's see how this one does, and then maybe we'll have a couple more. One of the reasons of doing that was to sort of have this structure where it wasn't just me just change the chair. And then, if I wanted to justify having sort of different positions or different roles, it would make sense if it was more than one practice. Unfortunately, I guess it worked out in the beginning, but our practice only big enough. We only have 6 ops, and then the 2 spaces that are being leased next to us. I think we'll be around to stay a little bit longer. So at some point, we're going to outgrow, even with
How many
split
chairs are you using?
5 out of the 6.
Like on a daily basis with one hygienist and you use 5 chairs?
Yeah, it gets a little challenging. So my hygienist will work out of 2 ops, but sometimes, I think we spoke about this in our other conversation, George, is we do a lot of Invisalign, so healthy tooth scan. So my exams do tend to take some time, and if she's got a next patient, she can use the operatory next to her. So she kind of works out of 2 ops, and then on any given day, I'll run 3 chairs, but one will be solely assistant driven, and then I'll work out of 2 essentially. So it's we work hard.
So your staff is how big?
So we have 2 assistants, a hygienist, and I have 2.5 front office.
Who's the half?
The half she's a part-timer. She comes 3 days a week. She helps us with accounts receivable. She kind of makes sure that all our payment plans and the in-office financing is up to date. And then she'll follow up on the insurance stuff. We have outsourced all insurance verification, all filing of claims, and all posting of the checks and all follow-ups. That's all outsourced.
So 2 assistants, 3 columns. How does that work?
It's rough. So one assistant will be with me. The other one will either help flip hygiene rooms or like set up columns 2 and 3. We try not to have more than 2 Invisalign deliveries or 2 sort of quote unquote unproductive stuff, or 2 crown deliveries and stuff in that. So the third one is mostly assistant driven, unless of course we run into things where I'm required. So most of the times I don't see personally the patients, or I'll just pop by and say hi and talk to them. But most of the times I won't see or won't examine the patients in op 3 or my third column.
Cool. So okay, so let's talk about multiple versus, and right, this is one of those things that it's not either you have multiple practices or you have one big practice. Like you could have both one larger practice and multiple locations. What is your thought along those lines of, growing your practice, multiple locations? Where are you kind of at with that whole thing?
So I'll just kind of lay the groundwork as luckily we're in a position where I don't really need my take home. Of course, we all could do with a little bit of extra money, but my husband has a pretty good job. So for my personal expenses, I don't really need to take home money. The second thing is the area that we are in at this point is just booming in startups and just booming in acquisitions. So even after I opened up my startup in my little town, we had 3 more practices open in a couple months right after we did. So, and that's just the nature of where we are. So one of the thought processes.
What state are you in?
In Texas.
Okay, cool. Keep going.
Yeah. So so it's just very challenging. I think, and it's just, getting saturated, but I always think that competition brings out the best in us. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but then we're all competing for, visibility and, space, and then there's only that much. So I think that I guess taking a step back, my office, as I said, is I feel like I'm the bottleneck where I can only, even though I'm running 3 columns, patients want to be seen. And, I like to always see patients with a new patient within 2 to 3 days and not book out treatment more than 2 weeks. So I do need, I think, a second hygienist. But with the way currently my exams are, and I'm opening to restructure them, I feel like I can only run my treatment and 1 hygiene column. So I would need help or an associate do that. And then when you ask me what's the theme of this year, is sustainability. So it's, obviously it's heavily reliant on me. So I'm trying to make it more sustainable to where my time is spent wisely. And I really hate doing fillings, or sometimes I hate even doing just basic general dentistry. So I'd like to focus more on implants and growing our Invisalign practice. And if I brought an associate to just do the basic general dentistry, I think that would work. And even if I'm not busy, I think if I spend that extra 5 minutes with a patient talking about what they need, that will be time well spent. So that's our practice is growing. I feel like it's ready for an associate, and maybe a second hygienist or both. Um, and then um, I also, and then the second part of it is, if we are going to have multiple practices, the time is now, because let's say there's an opportunity cost, at least, right? Like if I don't open an office within a year or two, the area that I'm looking at for a second practice, that could be saturated as well. And right now there's some good opportunities to be had. I feel so we would kind of do like a semi acquisition that was still, so we've looked at a couple offices that were sort of newer, only been open a year or two, so they're like semi startups where there's not a bunch of patients there, but we already know, I guess, through marketing and what we require, and we've done our research, and that area looks good. It's very similar to the one that we have our first office in. So there's an opportunity cost. So in a vacuum, ideally, I'd like to, grow my own practice and then wait until that's profitable and then start another one. But I don't know if, we have the time to do that, or the inclination, or will there even be opportunities in a couple of years, or will that area be super saturated? So that's the idea behind sort of doing two things at the same time. And it might be very tough for the next year, but if it pays off, it might be worth it.
I love this. Oh my gosh, this is like so my type of interview. So the things I love about this, before why does George get excited about this stuff, and why does George talk about himself in the third person? Well, a couple things. So one, I love that you don't require your practice income for personal expenses. I think that one very underestimated thing about people that can have high growth is their ability to make long-term oriented decisions at the sacrifice for short-term personal income. And the fact that you can do that puts you in a unique situation where you can do what's best for you in your career long term, and not need to take home $20,000 a month from your practice to pay your personal expenses. Like, that's huge.
Yeah.
Second is there's so many moving parts. Oh, it's so much fun. And then third is your practice style is so not scalable.
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it?
So it's funny because you have this awesome practice style, right? You diagnosed $300K a month from the last time I saw your PBN report off of your one hygienist. And I know you, every patient gets scanned with an iTero, like, it's great. It works super well. Does it scale? And that's the question, right? I'm not going to say no. It's just, we don't want to take away something from your practice that works very well. That's a culture piece in your practice. And so, the reality is you have all these moving parts. And I mean, so are you thinking a startup, or are you thinking an acquisition of a failed startup or a failing startup?
I think it's more of an acquisition of a failing startup / failed startup. So we're not, so I guess like everything.
So what would be the cost of that?
So we've actually found a couple practices. Again, I'm thinking the second ones are mostly like, I don't plan to work at the second one. Like if I'm working, it's more in a managerial capacity rather than. But yeah, we found like one for $200,000. It's 4 ops, ready to go. Great area in terms of what we can do. I think would bring.
How's the visibility?
It's pretty good, main road. So it's similar to what I have in my first practice. So my first one is like off of like a highway frontage road, and there's like a 4-way stoplight, so people tend to slow down before they take off.
What's your new patient flow?
At this current practice?
Yeah.
We'll see about 80 to 100. Some days, some months more, some months less. 80 to 100 new patients. But
what's your marketing budget?
I would say between 5,000 to 8,000, but the last few months we haven't even marketed that much. Now that we have, it's more organic now, so we've actually turned off all marketing we're spending the bare minimum on emergencies because I like to, those are the same day essentially things that I like to do. But we're still at like 60 to 80 patients. But now we have recalls, right? So we don't need that
Yeah.
kind of sheer volume.
So what types of marketing did you do for the first practice, the 5 to 8K a month? Where was that spent?
So the first 3 months we kind of went on a marketing blitz. So I did mailers, newspaper ads. PPC was a big chunk. I think the first 3 months we spent 6 to 8 thousand just on Google AdWords. In addition to send out 3 rounds of mailers. And then I did some Facebook ads, boost selected Facebook posts, and then ground marketing. And then as time went on, I would just do Facebook where a lot of people would see me, and then Google AdWords, and then we stopped mailers. So I think the last few months of last year, we just probably did about $5,000 to $6,000, and the bulk of it was Google AdWords. And then just getting reviews helped. We're like just shy of 400 reviews now. So I think when people just see that, they automatically gravitate towards us.
Okay.
Before we get back to the episode, I wanted to take a minute and thank Practice by Numbers. Without their help and allowing us to set up the shared practices dashboard, a lot of what we do on Practice Underwater wouldn't be possible. I want to take a minute and highlight a clip from the episode that we did with Rohit, where we highlighted some of the metrics that really matter most.
You cannot look at them just by themselves. You have to look at a few other things together with it. But the most important number any practice right off the bat should look at is patient acceptance. And the difference between treatment acceptance and patient acceptance is treatment acceptance is the amount of dollars that we're accepting. For example, if you presented $100,000 worth of treatment, how much of that has been accepted, meaning scheduled or completed? Okay, so in this particular example, if 100,000 was presented, 55,000 was accepted, or either scheduled or completed. But the second part is 72%, which is the patient acceptance. What this means is that if you presented $100,000 worth of treatment to 100 patients, meaning $1,000 per patient, 72 of those patients scheduled some aspect of that treatment. Looking at patient acceptance is the absolute best way to go.
I hope you guys enjoyed that clip. If you guys are interested in trying out Practice by Numbers and looking at your practice through the Shared Practices dashboard, and there are many other dashboards, you can go to practicebynumbers.com and set up a free trial.
So moving on to the second practice, then where are they currently at with new patient flow?
So they see about 30 to 40 new patients. I think that our areas where I have my first practice is a lot more competitive. Just looking at who the competition is, I think I'll be able to with the similar stuff. So, I think I've always heard you, and it's so true, right? Associates always will take more exams to diagnose the same amount. So I think that if I just kind of flood the associate with new patient exams, even give them 80 to 100, it's possible for them to maybe not post the same numbers, but enough to keep the practice growing and profitable at least. And even if we don't profit that first year, and even if we break even, it would still be a success. And then I plan to scale back to 3 days to where I can spend a day or a day and a half at the new practice, just kind of training the team, maybe quote unquote mentoring the associate, to see if it's possible. And then, of course, you could probably weigh in on this because you've had several associates, or at least a couple. But that's the plan. And then also mentor the associate that would work at my first practice. And then also continuing to mentoring even the team, because a lot of it, Invisalign, and we do a lot of co-diagnosing. So that would still play a big role in both offices, essentially.
Okay. And what's your 5-10 year vision from now? 5-10 years from now, anything you want in life, nothing off the table. Where are you at? What's your why?
Yeah. So I guess personally also scaling back from, full-time dentistries. I'm not getting any younger, so I do want to start a family here within a year or two. So I think the next year or two will probably be very crazy if everything starts working out that way. But it's also, I think, the freedom to choose whether I want to practice dentistry or not. At this point, I like dentistry, I like implants, I like doing Invisalign. So maybe in 5 years, I only want to do those two things, or I may not want to do them at all. But I think I'm sort of, it seems at least romantic to me at this point where I could choose to do dentistry or not. It doesn't matter. I think I probably see myself more in a sort of managerial position where I could maybe sort of, I think, as a solo dentist, one of the challenging things is I have to, there's the front office is such a forgotten part of the dental office. And I think I would like to train team members. That's where most of the training happens because, and then again, for me, I ignored it a lot in the beginning, but then I realized how important it is. So just maybe train and then have some more free time and step away, even if it's maybe if I want to practice 3 days a week, that would be great. But maybe, yeah.
How much money do you want to make?
It would be nice to probably collect or take home about 500 or 600.
500 or 600K working 3 days a week in a primarily managerial role. So 3 days a week clinically.
Yes.
And then managerial for the rest of your time.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Nothing you have said right now requires a second location.
Okay.
So I guess that's what I'm looking at it, and I'm saying nothing that you have said, everything that you want can be accomplished under one roof.
Okay.
So like let's forecast this for a minute. Right? 6 ops with your practice style, you can really, if you dial it in, you can really expand hours. You can, you don't have that many hygienists per dentist because of, the things that you do well. You can really fit at least 2 million easy collections in that practice.
Okay.
If you're operating at an EBITDA margin that you should be, with your debt service being so small as a startup, I would say you would have, let's call it $300,000 to $400,000 a year passively without picking up a handpiece, and then you pick up a handpiece. So nothing that you've said indicates a second location. Okay.
Well, can it be said that, let's say, if we were to sell the offices, and I know maybe in the next few years, wouldn't it sort of increase like the value of it? I guess, like, sure. Sometimes I think, so I get what you're trying to say, right? Like I might even have 2 practices and I'm still taking home 600 from both instead of maximizing just the first one. And
well, I mean, I think it's important to understand your why. That's what I'm trying to figure out. What is her why?
Well,
because I think a lot of times we say something like multiple practices, because multiple practices means to us passivity, not producing. That's what we really want. And the way that manifests itself is through what we say we want. And what I'm trying to figure out is, what do you want outside of what you say you want, right? So you're saying you want multiple practices. So now we're talking net worth. Now multiple practices, that's where it starts to make more sense. But anyway, continue your point about selling them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess net worth. So I will say another big reason of why we want to have multiple is not in the room here, but I think that's my husband's dream, is to maybe have like 3 or 4, and then he can help manage, and then do whatever he wants on the side. So that's part of his dream too. And I guess, like, when I said, having the choice to work or not to work plays a big role. So
yeah. So I think net worth, multiple practices. Yes. That's where multiple practices start to make sense. If we're talking income, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's a net worth game.
And okay, so let me rephrase. I guess I should have said, it doesn't matter to me whether I take home 100 or 600, right? Because at this point, we really don't need my income. I plan to have the quality of my lifestyle that I'm living right now is going to stay the same, whether I take home $100,000 or $500,000, and that's just how we live. So I think even having 3 practices or 4 practices, nobody will see me buying a private plane. So I think that's always going to stay. We're very happy with how we live right now. So
sure. And I think the thing that I'm looking at is, so now let's shift gears a little bit. We're talking either way, scaling beyond yourself.
Yes.
So right now, I think you are the and this is why I wanted to have you on the show. You are the prototypical person that is successful because of their skills. Like if we take a minute and take a step back, strengths and weaknesses is who you are as a doctor, right? And this is going to sound super blunt since I'm talking right to you, but I'm also talking to our audience. Diagnostically, case acceptance, productivity, same day dentistry, all of those things are in your strengths department. And last time we saw you, AR, leadership, staff turnover, systems and organization, all weaknesses.
Still a struggle.
Still a struggle in all those departments, right?
Yeah, still a challenge. Yeah.
Let's flip multiple practices now. Okay. So as a solo, it works for you because all the areas where you're strong are higher predicators of your success than all the areas where you're weak. The only thing that transfers to multiple is marketing. But your leadership, your AR, your everything that you currently don't do well gets magnified once you remove yourself from the equation as a dentist.
Sure.
So my advice is, before you put yourself in a situation where you are solely dependent on your weaknesses, try to make your weaknesses more of strengths. And that's where I come from on the standpoint of, right. And so of the standpoint of, do what you do well in one location, remove yourself from the equation in your first practice.
Right.
Because here's the thing, your first practice is much different than your second practice. This is, I think, what your staff knows you. Your staff knows that you have a culture, you have a systems of ways of doing things because you're there. So even if you're there half the time, things are still done your way because you're there half the time, kind of making sure that things don't fall off. Once you go into a practice where you're not there at all, it changes everything. And so I know that when you introduce an associate into your first practice, it is going to unbox this can of worms of stuff that you are totally unaware of how dependent on you it really is.
Yeah.
Like office management. Do you have any type of office management done by any staff member?
Yes. So I guess with my 2.5, so the part-timer and I have sort of laid the groundworks on what her role is and what she's supposed to do every single day. And then my check-in check-out person is hygiene scheduler, and then she's part of like insurance coordinator, although we don't really do much. So that's her role. And then the treatment coordinator, we've sort of had checklists for those. But I guess, yeah, that's actually a question for you, George, is how would you structure it? Or, I don't have an office manager, because when I did have one in the very beginning, it was disastrous. She thought, maintaining a sterile field was one of her duties as office manager. So it was just a disaster. So I wasn't able to, and part of it is me, right? Like you said it. It's a weakness, and I didn't know how to effectively manage either. So I learned through this process. So I guess it's like I have to appoint someone in more of a position of power. I have to create structure even in the, or like hierarchy even within my own office. And you're right, when we have maybe an associate or even a second hygienist, there's going to be a lot of issues and a lot of systems that are going to have to be created that we don't have. But my question is, can we not create that in two locations? And again, I know you touched base on it, saying just by pure virtue of me spending time in my first office versus not in the second one, is just going to be tougher.
Why would you want to do that? Why would you have acknowledged that you're not ready, but you want to do it anyway?
Well, so I think in my mind, when I said our area is just super competitive, if it's not me, I feel like someone else is going to, in 2 years, the new area that I'm looking at is just going to be super, super competitive too. And it's going to be that much harder. So I guess like maybe like planting a flag early, and even if we're not successful, we'll get some reviews, or we'll get Google reviews, and we'll get, things going at the second practice to eventually, it may not pick up as quickly as the first one did, but in 3 years we'll be better off there versus not being there at all.
I think you're right. I don't think you're wrong. I hear a lot of fear. Like it's this frantic place of making a decision where you're like afraid someone else is doing it, you should just jump on it.
Yeah.
It's like, I want this
Definitely.
thing because someone else might get it.
So it
I
was
don't
okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it was always a part of it, but because of COVID, I think opportunities have come that might have been harder to come by otherwise, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
definitely. No, I'm with you. I think it's just in general, I think as a decision maker, you're moving towards that, right? So we talk about you owning 2 practices now and maybe 3, 4. Your ability to be successful is on the decisions you make. And what place those decisions come from, frantic, fear-based, if someone else is like,
Yeah.
That's not the way that I want you to start getting used to making decisions. I want you to make decisions from the place of, this is what's best, unequivocally.
Okay.
And
yeah.
so that's where and right, you can do it. Fine. Like, you're doing it knowing it's not best and it's like a fear-based thing. You're like, cool, acknowledge it and move on. I don't care what you do with both practices or not. Like, really, they're both acceptable options. They'll both get you there. So you're not a parent. I am a parent, and I'm a parent of 2 kids. And the what we could get away with one did not work with 2,
Why? Yeah.
because you add more fire and shit to the storm. It broke the camel's back. Like, right, I'm divorced now. So like, I can speak from experience in saying that, like, what we could handle with 1 kid, we could not handle with 2. And it had nothing to do with the second child. He's awesome. It's just, it was on a faulty foundation. And so that's what I would say to you is, yeah, you have a faulty foundation. You and I have both acknowledged that. How much we want to put on top of that faulty foundation is up to you. But the reason we're putting it on top of the faulty foundation is we're afraid that someone else might take it. So we're going to put twice as much on the faulty foundation. I don't care what you do with the second practice. That's your life.
Sure,
You live
yeah.
it. It's just, I think it's my job to help you realize, 1, the place that the decision is coming from, right? The decision to own a multiple practice, I love it from a net worth standpoint. Great. I would like you to have the experience of an associate first in your own practice before you experience an associate outside of your own practice. I think the more we've been at shared practices, the more we've been doing this, and this is what I told you on the phone when we were talking, the more we've realized that this is more of a continuum. Solos turn into groups, turn into multis. And I kind of like that, solo to group to multi. That's like high school, college, pro. And you're going from high school basketball to NBA very quickly. And some fundamentals you learn in college basketball are being missed. And the fundamentals you learn of what it's like to have an associate contract, an office manager, some of these pieces that you haven't done yet successfully, and especially team management. I would like you, if I'm designing what's best for you in the world, I would like you to have experienced that all under your own roof first. And I'm going multiple practices too, right? Like, I can speak from experience. So yeah, I've hired my 4th associate in my career. So me and you have owned our practices for almost the same amount of time. I've had the experience of 4 associates now. Like, it's a little bit different for me buying a practice and not stepping foot in it clinically, because from an office manager's perspective, from an absentee ownership perspective, from everything, my practice runs the same, not the same exactly. And that's something I'm working on culture wise. It's not the exact same without me there, but it performs as well without me, if not better, because of who I am as a dentist versus, me there. And it's a very different place to come at multiple practices from. And I would like you to be able to say, in an ideal world, I have my associate who's productive, who, like, I want to see how much of your success is, I want you to make it replicatable. So then you know how to mentor the other associate. And that's what's best. I don't feel like that's a fault, but I think most people that get into multiple practices do it prematurely and figure it out on the fly. So it's just what you want to take on. And I don't care what you want to take on. But I think focusing on part 2, I think would be great in terms of how we turn your one practice into a group practice. I think can we, for the next part of this interview, take multiple practices out of the discussion? Not because you're not going to do it, but just because I want to go from high school to college. I want to talk about that next step, not the next step, because then we're skipping a step.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to know, how my practice can go within it. And one of the things that, over the last couple of weeks, and maybe this is coming out of a place of sort of being emotional, because they were just very, very hard at the practice. But I think you're absolutely right. Having an associate would open up, or or a second hygienist would open up a can of worms. And that's essentially what had happened. Is, we've had all these small issues, and then there was like just widespread panic because someone's boyfriend's niece's dad tested positive for COVID, and all of a sudden I find myself in my own practice without anybody, because everybody's now, and we went through like essentially what to do, Zoom calls of all of that, but there was just complete panic and chaos to where I go to my practice Monday morning and there's nobody in the front and nobody in the back. So I think that gave me some good pause, because I think with the magnifier that coronavirus was, like, I found out very quickly what was actually going on and who was, kind of with me, or not even with me, but where the trust lied and where it doesn't, and how much work I have to do just in sort of managing the employees and the culture and all that good stuff. So yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking even to myself briefly after our call, that maybe I should spend the next 6 months just growing my own practice, and then sort of taking those lessons, and then there'll still be opportunities to have, or the opportunities will be there, and then maybe even those 6 months would be a valuable time to learn and kind of go from there.
In my time owning my practice for 2 years, I've looked at, I think, 4 or 5 failed startup opportunities. If that's what you're looking for, they are a dime a dozen.
Okay.
I can't, and right, I'm not trying to be Mr. Anti-Startup right now, even though obviously I am. But failed startup for cheap acquisitions are all over the place. That is not a dying type of acquisition, right? You tell me a $2 million practice with $600,000 EBITDA, yeah, I'm on board with the scarcity there. A dying startup for 200K, yeah, you'll find those all over the place. That's the life of this in dentistry.
Yeah.
So I think, and so when you say like spend 6 months growing my practice, I actually think you're not going to have a whole lot of growth numerically.
Sure.
You're going
Yeah.
to have a lot of growth in infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the most important thing, is 6 months of infrastructural growth, so that when you leave your practice for a week, it still runs about the same. Like right now, if you left your practice for a week,
yeah,
right?
I know. Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like
For sure.
it's because you're awesome. I think it's so ironic that the people that solo come so easy to, because you have all of these key strengths, is the people that have the most work to grow into group. For me, I'm kind of the opposite, where because I, and I think there's this, so you know what? I'm going to go on a little rant. I think there's this misnomer about me that I am not a productive solo. Do you have to, as a listener, is that something that you think about me? Like, oh, George, he doesn't produce clinically, or he like, and so therefore he like goes this other way. I don't produce clinically because I don't want to. So I have had periods of my life where, so like my last month being a solo, I had a 4-month period where I had to be a solo in my practice. I did $110,000 of, it's adjusted production with my own 2 hands, not including hygiene. And that's like, if you annualize that, that's 1.3 something of adjusted production, essentially collections in my practice, off of just my own 2 hands. Like I can't do it. I hate it. So I feel like, I've developed both skill sets. Justin Short was my coach, and I honed in a solo skill set. I hate it. And so for you love it. You're good at it. And it's like it plays to your strengths. And so growing in this different area is very unnatural. So next episode, I really want to talk about 3 key roles in your practice: hygiene, associate, office manager. Those are over the next 6 months before, and right, you do whatever you want with multiple practices. I don't care. But before I am telling you, like, I think it's a good idea, I want an associate, another hygienist, and an office manager, and I want it to run well. And that to me shows me that you're on leadership 202 mastered. You can handle past your one front office, your one hygienist, one assistant. I know that your staff is more than that, but it's
Sure.
that kind of
Yeah.
feel
Oh,
of like
absolutely.
doctor to staff directly. Once you add that extra layer of now there's another doctor, now there's an office manager. And in your case, because of the way you schedule with your rooms, a second hygienist is going to implement some scheduling changes. So I think that is what I want to talk about on the next episode, where I feel like it'll be, and having your sole focus beyond that in your practice for the next 6 months, it will go a really long way.
No, absolutely. And then, if I actually might interject, George, I want to support you because you talk about the lazy dentist, but what you do best is so much harder, and I think dentists will take their entire lifetime sort of putting down the systems and sort of managing and leading the way you do. So I think it's so much harder than drilling a class 2 or prepping a crown is the skill set that you have. So um, I'm sure most of the people already know that, but that is the true challenge for someone like me who, yeah, sure, I can prep a crown or place an implant, but the stuff that you do is just way tougher for most of a majority of us. So you're by no means lazy at all.
So I have this, they did a personality test on me, and every time they do it, my ability to follow directions, live within structure, all of those things that make dentists really good at doing procedures according to rules is like in the lowest 5 percentile of all people in the United States. And so it makes doing dentistry very challenging for my personality type. And it makes leadership and management so much more natural because I'm very unbalanced. And I think most dentists have the very opposite personality.
Sure.
We're very introverted, very good at following directions and protocols and structures. And so dentistry is comes easy.
Yeah.
That is not how I'm built. So it all comes, I think we all focus on the things that come easy to us.
Yeah. No.
And, for me, I've had no incentive or desire to make myself any different because I like the way that my career is going. And so I don't change it. You, on the other hand, right? If you were like, I'm happy producing, collecting, staying solo, then you would be like, oh, I don't have to change anything about myself. But right now your goals are not aligned with your skill set. So we have to change.
Yeah.
And so, that's what we'll talk about in part 2. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming back on the show.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview. I really enjoyed that one. This is becoming one of my favorite topics, and it's something that a lot of my coaching clients are solo to group transitions, and this episode really sort of brought a lot of that home for me. So, Matt, what were some of your takeaways from part 1 with Sarah?
Yeah, I feel this is really a common track. Like we have, very, like you said in the interview, very ambitious, a lot of them solo owners who reach where they're trying to go. And then they're like, well, what's next? For her, it was multi-practice was her thought originally. For others, maybe taking more time off. So that like pivot point of I'm pretty maxed out as a solo. Mm-hmm. What do I do? I don't think that has really been covered enough kind of in, dentistry, the forums, whatever. So this is cool that we're diving into it more.
Yeah. And it's sort of my least favorite part about practice management is getting to the productive solo. Getting that person that has one hygienist, one front office, one assistant, and building them up to be that, $1.2 million practice. That to me is about the most boring realm. And that's where I think every online forum and conversation is centered around, is getting to...
that's most of dentists, right?
Yes.
Most of owners.
And for me, my favorite parts are once they're there, then what? And it's do you either go, and Matt called it, like, either cutting your days, growing your practice, doing 2 million as a solo, doing something crazy or special as a solo, or you go to group. Those are the two routes. And for me, I think multi-practice is funny because I view it as a totally separate thing. You can still go group practice in your own practice while doing multiple practices, or you could go group practice in your own practice without doing multiple practices. But I think for me, the part that I've evolved in is the experience of having associates and an office manager and team leads and all of that is, in my mind, a great ground to train on multi-practice skill sets. I would hate for somebody's first associate to also be in a separate practice that they've never, ever employed a full-time associate in. A lot of those things can be learned in your own practice before you go multi-practice. And that was sort of what I was trying to communicate with Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. Like the thought of having your first associate at a different building, your first manager at a different building, like, I mean, that's skipping a bunch of steps. And she's extraordinary. She could probably make it work, but it would be a headache for her, definitely.
Yeah, and we had long time ago, we had a nightmare second practice acquisition on air. Matt, do you remember that episode? It was actually one, and this is before we had people's anonymous names. So we actually had a dentist willing to come on air and talk about how she lost a ton of money in a second practice. And
I feel like that's pretty typical. Like you hear
very
about
typical of a dentist that buys a second practice. They usually have one. It's going well, and it's going well because of their own clinical skill sets, their ability to produce, and like Sarah, right? What are the things that are causing her success? Are marketing and communication diagnosis. Period. And so marketing will transfer, but communication diagnosis won't, because she won't be there. And so that's where you need to grow, and you need to get skills in other areas that are going to be more direct transfer. But dentists think, oh, I'm killing it in this first location, so let me just go kill it in a second location. But it's really not the same. And we had a dentist that on air a long time ago who bought a practice, and then she bought a second one, and she learned very quickly, and they usually stop at 2 or 3 because they just don't like multi-practice. And I think a lot of those principles that would make you successful in multi-practice are group. That's kind of the baby step into multiple, is the way I like to look at it.
Yeah, it's not so much like you get to a certain profitability or collection number in your first practice before you're quote unquote ready for that second one. It's kind of more you've experienced building infrastructure that doesn't involve so much of you in it in your first practice before going to another. Now that makes that transition so much more seamless.
And I think one of my favorite things that shared practices is how different we are from the industry norm. I think industry norm says when your collections are over $1 million and your overhead is less than 65 or 50% or whatever the heck people say, I don't even know, then you're ready for a second practice. And, I'd love to come in and say, when you have an office manager and a full-time associate, you're ready for a second practice versus anything else, because I think those are the actual things you need for a second practice, not a certain amount of profitability in your first location.
And right, like you did it perfectly. You didn't steer her away from the idea. You said, hey, 6 months, like get these things in place. And then, you're more equipped to go after that other practice. And you called it out for her being fearful about the good practice being scooped up and the markets being saturated. I saw it. Fear, definitely. Also scarcity, just scarcity of patience, scarcity of good offices out there. And, it wouldn't serve her to come from those places when making this kind of rash decision.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about it again, as I've probably talked about it a lot, but the impact fear has on decision making and being committed to coming from a different place. And it's funny because the practices she was calling desirable, nobody else would.
Yeah, they were failed startups, right?
Yeah, failed startups. And I told her, those are all over the place. Like there are failed startups everywhere. And you can have those anytime you want. That's not a desirable practice in my mind. It's the high collections that are desirable.
Well, it didn't make any sense because she mentioned that a bunch of other offices came in her town and she didn't blink an eye, yet she was really fearful about other offices coming into that other town that she was going into.
So interesting.
She welcomes competition in one area, but in another area she's got to scoop it up now or there'll be too much competition.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, the scarcity thing. She's already had success in her own practice, and she doesn't fear the local competition because she knows how she's different and what she does. And I think that she doesn't feel that same way in a different area. But, again, it's funny the role that fear plays. When we started Practice Underwater, I didn't think I'd be talking about fear as much as we have been. But I think it's the thing that keeps coming up over and over again is trying to minimize acting. We will always have fear. Right, she will be afraid that practice will be scooped up. Still, I didn't get rid of that, but it's acting in spite of it that is the skill.
Yeah, it's not in the driver's seat. It's just in the back seat. You know, it's there. It's not making a decision.
It's not going away. That's the key that I want people to realize, that we all have fear.
Yeah, and the other big piece to take away from this was how she doesn't use her take home income she doesn't need it for her lifestyle.
Yeah.
I know you believe very strongly in this. It allows her to make more sound, long-term based decisions. Like, I think that's important. If you're not dependent on, I got to get 25,000 at the end of the month, or like I can't live the life I want, then you may not invest in that iTero scanner that's going to grow your practice down. You're not going to invest in the marketing that's going to grow a practice. Like, So like letting the lifestyle creep is a real thing.
Oh yeah.
As big as you can push it down in the interim while you're growing, the better.
Yeah, I think that's, from a personal philosophical standpoint, really, really ingrained in my way of doing things. Is the second you're reliant on your income to be at a certain level, your growth is stagnated by that level, because you will always make decisions to maintain that level every single month, as opposed to, like if we're talking 25K a month, what if one month she makes 10K because she invested 15K, but then the next month, 3-4 months from now, she's making much more. It'll make up for itself over the long haul. But if that's not the way you operate, where you need that every single month consistent income, that's not going to maximize your net worth and growth long term, for sure.
Yeah. And I've talked about it here before, but that was me with the student loans. Like I had to put 30K student loans every month. And I was just so dependent on that number that it stalled my progression in the practice longer term. And, I saw effects for that for a while. If I had to go back, I would just be, I don't know, more at ease about it, right? Like,
yeah,
they're going to get paid off. They'll still do fine. It doesn't have to happen all at once,
Matt, have you opened up about the student loan thing on air?
I've talked about it a little bit, but
do you mind if I push into that and ask you more about it?
Yeah.
Or, because I think it's like the sexy thing right now is like pay off your student loans in a short period of time, and like, but can you talk about how that might have hindered, how that mentality that you had about student loans hindered your growth?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it was purely an emotional charge, right? Like I was frustrated that school cost that much. I wasn't happy with my education at Tufts. I thought they did a really poor job. And my way of like that anger that built up was like, I'm going to pay these down super fast because these aren't going to dictate my financial life in the early part of my career. And that's where I came from with it. It was like, I hate these. I'm going to attack them. And I'm not even debt averse. Like, that's not even who I am. It was just those, like something about those, the way, like what I made them mean. And then as far as how that impact the practice, I mean, I just wouldn't make the investments in marketing, in like every money I spent was kind of like the guilt feeling that like, well, like you really should be doing this. Like you need to get that 30K at the end of the month. So like every purchase, that little voice was in there, and that stopped me from making purchases that I should have kind of been investing in at those times. So, I mean, if anyone's in that boat and really want to tackle, like there's a way to do it smarter than that. You don't have to just crush them just so you can tell people, hey, I paid off $300,000 in 1 year.
Yeah. And I think it's funny because it's so front loading, right? It's like the earlier you invest in your practice and you put that dollar into your practice, the more months moving forward, it'll pay you back. And that early career knocking out student loan mindset is the opposite of that. You're taking all of your liquidity and investable dollars that could be growing for you long term and putting them into this debt. I've never been able to see that mindset. It's never made sense to me.
It's the same with general investing, right? Compounding interest. Like these are the early parts of your career that when you put money into it, you'll see more out of it than you would if you're 45 and doing the same.
I mean, but even investment in your practice is the best return you're ever going to get.
Yeah.
It's not even close. And so, yes, anyway, I'm happy. Thank you for talking about that, Matt. I think that is, I mean, I literally just saw a Facebook post yesterday of like, hey, I'm going to have docs on that are crushing their student loans early in their career. I'm like, why are we pushing forward this terrible narrative that doesn't
I hope our audience has graduated from that. Like,
yeah, it's like very basic level of financial knowledge.
It's like everything we're trying to get out of people's heads with this saturation, the student loans, I don't know, all those like industry things that we don't agree with. I hope we're doing a good job attacking those. Hopefully.
And I appreciate part 2. I really enjoyed part 2 of this episode with Sarah. It's coming up next week. Matt did not enjoy it. It was a little bit too close to home for him. So I think we'll talk about that in the outro next week.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Practice Underwater. We'll see you guys next week.
If you're interested in one-on-one coaching with either Dr. George Hariri or Dr. Matt Garino, our contact emails are in the show notes.
And if you're interested in being on Practice Underwater as a guest, where we could look at your practice anonymously, you can go ahead and contact the email in the show notes and follow those directions to get on the show. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next week on Practice Underwater.